So fabulous panel from dialing in from all over the world today. So I'm really happy to welcome them. And the topic is mastering the art of remote first culture. We will define that. We'll get rid of any jargon as part of the webinar panel's input, and how to successfully transition your organization. So we're going to give lots of tips on how to think about that transition, how to plan it out, what considerations you may need. And this is the perfect opportunity to say that we will have Q&A at the end. Also, we are grabbing questions as they come along, so don't be afraid to pop your questions into the Q&A box. Charles in the back room in the States there, he is a humdinger. He's always taking care of everything. Backroom staff are the best, as you know, the backroom team. So he will be keeping an eye on that Q&A and grabbing those questions. So if you have any questions to start off with, make sure you make a note of them. And we'll also try and answer those as we go along, but we'll also make sure that we cover them off in Q&A. So let's have a time check, and we can see when we move along. So I'm introducing myself again because I see we've got another 20, 30 people that have joined in the last few seconds. Fantastic to see that. Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon, ciao from Tuscany in Italy. Here with Boundless Live today with my family on one of their summer programs. So it's fantastic to be here in Tuscany. My name is Rowena Hennigan. I'm a keynote speaker, founder of Row Remote, and world leading expert on remote work and digital nomadism. You can check out my LinkedIn profile, and also I've got a newsletter link on there as well with almost 14,000 subscribers. So wonderful to be here again. I'm here monthly with SafetyWing, moderating these webinars. So wonderful to be here today. And on behalf of SafetyWing, welcome. SafetyWing offer global benefits for the remote workforce. And you can find out a little bit about their product roadmap here, which is a really inspirational, interesting graph of what SafetyWing are doing to provide a global social safety net as we move more and more into a borderless world. So you can see a view of that there, including their different products like remote health, remote doctor, retirement, etc., etc. So thank you again to SafetyWing for sponsoring today. A little bit on the agenda. We're going to run a poll, we always do, to get us a little bit warmed up and in the mood, make it interactive, make sure that you tuning in are also with us fully. Going to run a poll in a second, then we'll move on to the panel discussion. And as I said, have your questions ready. You can make a note of them now. You can pop them into the Q&A as we go along. There'll be Q&A answers at the end from the panel. So we're going to run that poll. So is your organization borderless? So take a moment and let us get a bit of a feel for what situation, what your context is in the audience. Maybe you don't have any plans to go borderless outside of your own country. We have lots of big countries around the world that have remote work locally across regions within their countries, like India and Australia, for example. Or maybe you're looking at moving into more than a couple of countries. So I can see that the poll is collecting responses there, lots and lots coming in. Let's have a look there and see. 62% have voted, actually. Fantastic, you're quick off the mark today. So we'll make sure that we leave it run till maybe around 80–90%. That's ticking up. So pick one of the options there and let us know about your context as an organization or the organization you are representing. So we're up at almost 70%. Fantastic, and I think we can give that another few seconds and we'll close it off. Let's have a look at the results. All right, so we've got these extremes like we've had in the last few webinars, which is really interesting. We've got almost a quarter that are saying no, and then very much more than in 2 countries and more, a huge majority. So that's really interesting, and particularly those ones that are in 6 countries and more. Again, almost a third. So it's fantastic to get that snapshot of our audience, understand where you're coming from, the different levels, the context, and maybe your information or your knowledge levels in relation to remote first culture. Thank you for that, George, and thank you for that, Charles. Moving over to introduce our panel today, and we've got a fantastic panel. Danielle Farage, delighted to be welcoming her, founder and work futurist, and you can check out her details there. Gonzalo Hall, Chief Executive Officer and Nomad of Nomad X, and also a world leading expert on digital nomadism, and Neil Kemp, who is the CEO and co-founder of Strider. Two are dialing in from the States, and Gonzalo is down in Gran Canaria. So I am delighted to welcome them all here today. Let's see if we can get them to pop on their cameras and say hello. I'm just waiting for Gonzalo here. Give it a minute or two. Welcome, welcome. Hooray. Hi, everybody. Pop on your audio so we can all say hello. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So welcome, welcome. So we're going to start, and I'll go around the virtual room. So I've got Neil sort of to my right. I don't know how it's appearing to everyone. So Neil, give us a little quick intro, 30 seconds about where you are and why you're here today.
Sure. Well, I'm calling in from the North Shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota, but I'm usually based in Brazil. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Strider, and we help companies hire exceptional remote developers in Latin America. And why am I here today? We work with companies like the poll showed of all shapes and sizes in their journey to working remotely and working across international borders. And we see how different companies encounter both challenges and benefits of working remotely, incorporating people from other countries and cultures into their workforce.
Fantastic. In a nutshell, very well done, Neil. Danielle, over to you.
Awesome. Great to see you again. So I am Danielle Farage, like Garage with an F. I am a founder and work futurist, as I mentioned in the slide, and I also am a speaker and a Gen Z educator around the future of work, as well as a top 10 future of work influencer. So I help orgs attract, retain, and really engage Gen Z talent. I like to say we go from highly entitled to highly engaged, and I've been featured in a number of publications such as the New York Post, Harvard Business, BBC, lots of others. Just came out with one from Fast Company about Gen Zers flocking to LinkedIn for their personal branding, which leads me to my next point is I speak for universities as well, really about, for Gen Zers, right? Like how do you actually create internal change within your organization and tell your personal story? So excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. And Danielle and I are both LinkedIn top voices. So I'm coming at it from a totally different perspective at 51 years of age. Another generation potentially. And Danielle is my go-to. She'll validate this on Gen Z. Sometimes I'm like, tell me what I should be thinking about that, because I'm not quite sure I'm down with the kids on that one. So I go to Danielle on that. Wonderful to have you here today, Danielle. Absolutely fantastic. Gonzalo, over to you.
Hello, hello. Well, I'm the CEO at NomadX. We have worked with governments all over the world to create communities so we can travel in between places. I used to consult companies into moving to remote work. I did that for 3 years, and now I mostly write about it to HR magazines and on my LinkedIn. Not a top voice yet, like these two ladies, but we are working in it. We are working on it. I also have a podcast, the Remote Work Movement podcast, where I interview cool people and to speak about the future of work, remote work, digital nomadism, and everything in between. And yeah, I love to speak about everything, companies, governments, and future of work, as we really need to change the way we work. And we have now probably the best opportunity in history to change for the best the way we live.
Fabulous, and such a nice wrap up there, because it is about how we live, isn't it, Gonzalo? When we can change locations, untether from a location. And what you really have is such a diverse panel here. Not only are they founders and remote first advocates together, I wouldn't want to count up all our years experience in the remote first role, because I'd say it's quite significant. So I'm really, really confident that they can guide you in terms of that remote first culture piece. So let's kick off with no more further ado to the discussion. So what I wanted to start off with is, because we really try on these webinars not to use too much jargon. So going around the room, and I'm going to go to Neil first, then to Danielle and Gonzalo, as succinctly as you can, and if someone else says it before you, great. How would you define to someone who knows nothing what is remote first operations or in a remote first organization. Yeah.
Got it. Well, thanks for letting me kick it off here, and really appreciate the introduction at the start. So what is remote first? I think, first of all, we have to juxtaposition it against what are the other options, right? In-person, hybrid, and remote. Remote first to me is making sure that your entire team is better equipped to work remotely. That's what it means to me. When you think about in-person hybrid, a lot of the communications are done in person at the water cooler, let's say. Things aren't necessarily put online. For me, some of the key principles of remote first work are making sure that it's a priority that people working remotely are ready to do their job, that there's written communication, that there's the right tools in place to do their work, that these conversations aren't siloed in in-person conversations or private threads, that they're put into the public for everyone to know and understand. I'd also say that there's more of a results-based performance methodology. So what I see with remote first cultures is that they really embrace results, because you're not, seeing people every day. You're not seeing them in person, and you're really relying on the results of their work to judge how well they're doing from day to day. So those are the elements that I would put into remote first culture, are really making sure that the body of work is online and accessible, that you can all do your work asynchronously without getting blocked, and that everyone who's working remotely is well prepared with tools and communication to do their jobs well.
Fantastic. Very, very extensive. Well done. Well done. I think you covered almost all of it. But Danielle, have you anything else to add or anything different?
Yeah, I think from more of a people standpoint, I think as someone who graduated during the pandemic and has started my career, only worked in a remote first capacity, I would say there's a big focus on inclusion, especially amongst remote first teams that do it well, of course. So when you're remote first, you're conscious of the fact that there might be people who are working in person more often than others. And so optimizing for that, optimizing for all of the different ways in which someone might be able to do their work, and keeping that in mind. And I think there's a huge focus around that with inclusion and DI, and the benefits there are really higher belonging, right? And higher trust, higher engagement. And then I would put along with that, intentionality around when you are together in person, how are you actually leveraging and using that time in a way that is aligned with your North Star, that is aligned with what people need when in those critical moments of in-person synchronous time. So I would just add on to that there.
Wonderful, bringing the real people view in there as well to supplement Neil's contribution. Gonzalo, anything extra or different to add?
I would like to quote some of my heroes, which is the Doist. I think Doist did it well. And one of the things they say a lot is culture is not about how your team socialize together, it's much more about how they work together. And when we speak about remote first, I think we are mistaken, most of us, thinking that it's where we work from. I see it much more on how we work, and we need to change the how we work so the where we work doesn't matter anymore. So for me, remote first culture is a location independent way to actually manage and grow companies, as sync first, documentation centric, and based on outputs, as Neil said very, very well. And definitely most research shows that remote first is just a better management system for companies.
Totally, Gonzalo. We're all on the same page, because John O'Dinn, the Irish author of Distributed Teams, said something very similar to Doist in terms of that remote first organizations give you the blueprint of an operational model in his book. So that links that all together. But I want to make an observation on everything that you said. And Danielle did say the word benefits. And if you're listening to this conversation and you're a little bit confused, let me give you a couple of quick tips. First of all, in terms of understanding the definition, you do need to understand the benefits first. So try writing a list or doing some research about remote work benefits, because Danielle very much brought in the angle of inclusion, the angle of, obviously, if we're thinking from a DEI perspective, it is that, but if we think of it from an organizational perspective, it's a global talent pool, it's access to, Neil will talk to this, to workers from all over the world that will boost your talent pool there as well. So go through a list of the different benefits, then maybe go down and think again about the question, what is a remote first operational model? Because when I've worked with companies, we often start with those benefits, and a lot of leaders, a lot of organizations out there, even I am learning about them daily. The gambit is so wide on remote work first benefits because it can be very individual. What Neil thinks is a benefit could be very different from Gonzalo. What Danielle thinks could be very different because of stage of life, because of personal disposition, because of family situation, whatever it may be. So it's a really good place to start with benefits and then move on. But that's painting the rosy picture, and let's remind ourselves of the title. So what we also have in the title is a hint, I think, for anyone joining in. So it's not just about mastering remote first culture and how we might think about what that involves. It's also about transitioning. So I think that word is really important in the panel, in the title for today's panel, because it really depends on where you are, doesn't it? So I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball. Neil, Gonzalo, and Danielle. I'm going to start with Gonzalo, go to Danielle, then Neil. Anything to share on companies or organizations transition from a context, from where they are at the moment? So Gonzalo, I know you have experience consulting, so it might be something that you can add some value to there. Anything to share on how a company understands where they are in terms of transitioning?
I think, again, we need to think about this as a completely new way of working. I'm comparing it a lot lately with Agile. 20 years ago, when we heard for the first time about Agile, it was not about something new. It was about a new way of working, a new framework. And sometimes I think the name remote first, remote work is quite unfair to the whole new system we have to work. So as I see it, and again, repeating myself, I think we should really think on three main areas. The first one is communication. Is communication still mainly synchronous, or are we transitioning to asynchronous communication? So less real-time communication, more asynchronous work, so we can actually focus more and produce more better work. The second part, and this is the part where 99% of the companies, even the big ones, were failing and are still failing, in my opinion, because it's boring as hell, is documentation. And there is no remote work without documentation. Do you have documentation that if someone enters your company today is able to perform most of his or her work only based on the documentation? I would say 99.9% of the times the answer is no. So most of the times we have here a problem with documentation that is key, so we can have more synchronous communication that is key if we want to work in different time zones. And then is, how do we manage people? Do we manage by time? Do they have to work 9 to 5, 8 hours, 9 hours a day? Or are we managing the outputs? If your team, each one of the individuals, don't have a specific measure for what they should produce, what is expected from them, it's probably that they actually also don't know. So imagine you have a marketing manager. How are you measuring the success of this marketing manager? What is the output expected by him? If you don't have these three steps, at least, very clear, and I know the other two panelists will go deeper into this, you are probably not ready to work remotely on this new system. So these are the three main areas we look before everything else. And I'll let the others carry on from this more general overview.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Over to you, Danielle.
I love that. I think that was a beautiful overview. I want to dive a little bit more, obviously, into the people side of things. So, one of the things, within documentation reminds me of this great acronym that I know, which is PEN, Policy Etiquette Norms. So within that documentation, obviously, I like to say policy is a living, breathing document. It's not always set in stone. And so having flexibility around what your policies are, allowing that to be driven a little bit also by the etiquette that is forming, the norms that are forming, and creating this constant feedback loop, right, of what's working and what's not. One of the stats that was really surprising to me during the pandemic was only 37% of leaders were actually surveying their employees when it came to their return to work or policy, or their strategy moving forward. And I just thought that was, there's so much more room for improvement there in terms of, I think that remote first is really this concept of, because it's so focused on inclusion and intentionality, and you have to be so specific and document everything, there is a need also to make it a conversation, right? People can join in the conversation because of the documentation, because of the extra steps that you have to take in order to be intentional. And one of the things, I think a lot of organizations who are transitioning, as Gonzalo said, are failing, not because the concept of remote work or remote first or flexible first, whatever you want to call it, doesn't work, but because they're not being intentional about it. And so a lot of the organizations that are calling numbers of people leaving.
Okay.
And so I think that's another consideration, how do you actually retain people? How do you show, care on display? How do you engage them and give them a seat at the table? And then also, how do you attract them, right? How do you tell the story of your transformation to attract more workers? Because a lot of people, most people, are looking for a flexible first or totally remote culture. So just to keep in mind there.
Beautiful, Danielle, and that really complemented Gonzalo's piece, because you very much not just brought in the people angle, you brought in leadership skills there. So I just want to call that out, because we're around this world for a long time, and I think we need to be careful sometimes. There is a huge gap in the leadership skills. It's already, the research shows it as well. So don't be afraid, right? If you don't know or understand everything that we're speaking about, because you don't need to, you're not meant to. It is something that also organizations need to realize, that people need to be trained as leaders and supported as leaders to support that transition in the organizational model. But Neil, you're an expert in terms of, because you're a founder yourself and because of the work that your company does. So would you add anything else? Don't forget the question in terms of the context of organizations and transitioning, and also what we've just spoken about. What would you add to the conversation?
Sure. So I think there's a couple perspectives that I would bring. Number one, and having been inside of companies who both were remote first from the start, companies that were hybrid and transitioned to remote first because of COVID, and also being in companies that are fully in person, one of the challenges I see is with the talent that they have. One, certain people have the habits and the skills to work in person better. Other people have the skills and the talents to work remote first better. And I think those skills can be developed either way, right? I don't think these are, totally, different concepts, but if you've, spent, 5 or 10 years of your career in one mode and switch to the other, it might be difficult. For me, I've been remote first since 2009, if you can believe it, really early on. Actually, while I was still getting an education, I remote schooled myself in high school with online classes. And if I had to switch to in-person work, I wouldn't know how to do it as well, right? And so I have a lot of empathy for the people who've, spent their entire career working in person. COVID hit, and then all of a sudden, things were turned on their head, and remote first became the dominant force for work, right? And I think companies need to think about how to support those people, because if they're switching to remote first, it means they had an in-person or hybrid office to begin with. A lot of those early people, your leaders, really crucial people to your organization, have the skills built and the experience built for in person, and you need to figure out how to support those people to transition, to be able to retain them, to have them be productive and keep that institutional knowledge. So that's what I would add. I'd also like to add, and if this part's coming up separately, I'd love to add a little bit about the recruitment and selection process for new people entering your org, but want to ask you if I should wait on that.
We'll give that 1 minute, because we actually have a question. People are really paying attention. Awesome. So well done, audience. Well done, audience. You have to give them lots of encouragement. And then there was a question, Gonzalo, about your piece on documentation, and someone very correctly or very, very intelligently asked, in terms of your reference point that you shared about documentations, did you mean SOPs, or as we say in the remote work world, standard operating procedures, when you were talking about documentation? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, and yes, that's important, of course, and everything else. Meaning, for example, meetings. Meetings should be documented, as maybe we have a distributed team with people in Asia, America, etc. If you don't document and record meetings, this information may be lost. And document decisions, not just the decisions you made, but what is the context of the decisions. Imagine we made a decision to invest 5,000 euros on Instagram, because Instagram is our #1 platform and we want to double down. Because in 2 years, if your investment was not that good, people will ask, why did you did it? And you'll say, because back then this was the context. These are just two of the things you definitely should also consider into adding to your documentation. But honestly, the whole day-to-day life, recording the meetings for me is a must, because then I can watch the meetings at 1.5 or even two times speed, and I can go through the meetings without being present and still be informed of what happened, or just read the small short summary. So yes, SOPs are key, of course, and they are always changing, as Danielle said said very well. But also all these little pieces of day-to-day life that more people want to know about, which will also demand that you are very transparent on the way you manage, on the way things run at your company.
Definitely. And we're back into that leadership piece, aren't we? I know you say manage, I say leadership, but in terms of, because you have to role model as a leader, but in terms of that piece about that, I thought it was interesting actually listening to Gonzalo as well. We're back to the title of the panel and the webinar today. So transition, it's not just a transition for organizations, it's a transition for individuals in the skills that they may need to learn, even with some of the jargon and concepts we're endeavoring to break down here today. So that's a great question. Again, feel free to drop them into Q&A. Charles is keeping an eye on them, and if we don't cover them naturally in the flow, we'll come back to them. So I want to move on and to Neil's point as well about that piece on recruitment. So let's just take some stock for a second. So we've looked at benefits, we've got a definition, we've also looked at some examples from the expert panel in terms of context and how things you can consider, and we're getting lots of different angles here as well. So what I want to go to now is more the common challenges and roadblocks or lessons you've learned. So Neil, I'm going to start with you and let you definitely wax lyrical on that recruitment piece, because I think designing, as we know, the way recruitment fits into an overall organizational design, designing for the recruitment piece can be really helpful. Then we go to Danielle again. Any roadblocks, any challenges, any lesson learned in terms of your experience? And we'll finally go to Gonzalo. Neil. You're on mute, my friend. Hello.
There we go. Quote of the year. You're on mute. Yeah, I want to take this from recruiting and selection process. Like I said at the beginning, we work with companies to help them hire and retain software developers in Latin America. So we're often working with companies that sometimes have only people in the United States and they're hiring in Latin America for the first time. We have other companies who've hired in Latin America before. We have companies that have worked in person primarily. So really a wide variety. And we see some differences in how companies who have a lot of experience with remote first work interview people and how companies that have primarily worked in person interview people. And I do believe that they're looking for slightly different skill sets in those. And I think there's two parts of a recruiting and selection process, especially for really top talent. Again, we work with developers. Developers always have a lot of options. And as much as you have to be vetting and selecting that person, you also have to be selling that person on your opportunity. So if you're a remote company, developers, I would say, are the most sensitive to remote work. They don't want to be in a lot of meetings. They want to, have their work be able to be asynchronous. They want to be able to work seamlessly remotely. And that recruiting process is, like I said, a way of showing off your company. If you have a process that says, I don't know how to do remote work, those developers are much less likely to join your company because they know that you're going to do things that waste their time, that are not productive. They just want to sit down and write code. And you can apply this to a lot of different professions. Again, I'm just speaking from what I have the most experience with. What I see, for example, a lot of in-person companies, they're used to doing on-site. So they'll bring somebody in, they'll do a series of interviews with a lot of different people on the team and spend half a day, sometimes a full day with them in the office. In person, I think that makes sense, right? You're going to be sitting next to this person every day. I think there's just different things that you need to be compatible in an office workspace. If you're working with somebody remotely, there's different skills that you need. You need to know that that person's going to be able to do written communication over email really well, that they're going to be able to take a task, run with it, ask the right questions, and turn it in and have good results with it. And if they aren't somebody you necessarily would want to sit beside in an office, it doesn't matter so much. If they produce good results, they mesh well with your company, they work hard, they're going to be somebody great for your team. And I actually think it really opens you up to a much more diverse workforce because you're able to bring in people that might be different skills than in person. So what I see those in-person teams doing is those long processes, and sometimes people like to copy and paste that recruitment and selection process to remote. So they'll want to do a 4-hour Zoom interview with 16 different people. I actually had a company come to me, it was 4.5 hours for that company. I said, all right, I think that's going to send the wrong message to your candidates about remote work. Here's how we suggest. And the way that we've seen work really well for companies if they're doing the recruitment and selection process themselves is you start out with an intro call, meet a recruiter, meet a hiring manager, generate interest in the role, sell your company. The second step is an asynchronous work simulation. If you're a developer that's writing some code, should always be something simulated. It should never be work for your company. People are sensitive to that. They don't want to be doing free work. If it's an account executive, you might have them write you a couple emails and prepare a presentation for you to sell them on a fictional product. And then lastly, doing a final interview that's limited to 1 to 2 hours with the main stakeholders on the team, but not a panel of 30 people to do consensus judgment. So that's what, if you want to copy and paste a good remote work selection process, that's what I recommend. We've seen that work really well, and that's what a lot of the companies that do remote first do. It shows off the company well, shows you can do remote work, shows that you're not going to have people in all day long Zoom calls and that they're just going to be able to do their work effectively. So That's what we recommend and see for recruitment and selection.
Wonderful, and that model sounds like something that will be in other industries soon, other than tech, by the way, because again, most people are very conscious of that time, their time being used in the recruitment process and it being respected. And it very much leans into good employer branding and general marketing as well, as you've said, Neil. Danielle, would you add anything different, anything else?
Sorry, I was having trouble hearing you. So yeah, in terms of the challenges, I think just kind of briefly, you know, I mentioned being transparent and when you're in transition, I think especially when you're in uncertainty, especially people need to see strong leadership. And I feel like a lot of people during the pandemic didn't get strong leadership. They didn't get much transparency. They got, you know, emails every so often being like, oh, we're thinking about, this is what we're thinking about, or this is what the plan is. And then that kind of was pushed back, right? And so there's a lot of like exhaustion. There's a lot of burnout. I think those are some other things that we need to be considerate and aware of. Burnout more specifically, right? And you know, there's this one argument I wanted to sort of zoom in on that I know Ro and I talked about maybe doing a little something around, which is this case of, oh well, if you're not in the office, then you know mentorship doesn't happen. And I think that yes, learning and development and mentorship and water cooler conversations have traditionally always taken place in the office. And more specifically, I remember speaking to and working with a law firm where one of the managers said to me, oh, you know, it bums me out that we, you know, are remote right now, remote first, and we only go to the office, you know, twice a week because I really miss mentoring these associates and you know these graduates and coming in and just giving them some help and I said to him, well, you know, you can still do that. You know, it's about being intentional, and if you truly want to prioritize that and you think that it's beneficial for them, then make it a program, right? Like make it like a solid documented tangible thing that can live on, because when you know you eventually move on from this firm is going to lose that. It's going to lose you, and there's no reason why it can't happen today, right? And it's kind of just this. I think that a lot of people have this blockage. Going back to the leadership sort of equation, it's they have this blockage of, well, if we can't do it in person, or if there's less time in the office together, then you know then there's no time for it. When realistically there should be less meetings. A friend of mine sat in a 2.5 hour meeting yesterday, and she said, you know, post layoff, they had this 2.5 hour meeting, and she said, I literally don't know what was even said. Like it was pointless, and it was 2.5 hours. And so I would like to fast forward through that if I were her. But you know, I think that over the past few years, I've definitely seen a lot of organizations sort of transition, you know, the ones I've worked at as well, transition from, okay, we're going to get together every day, a 9 to 5 and in the office, to, okay, when we're together, this is how we're going to spend this time. And that can look like a lot of different things. One of the things I'm zoning in and focusing in on right now is helping organizations actually craft what that time together looks like. And if it's, you know, mentorship or it's friendtorship, as I like to say, mutually accountable, beneficial relationships that are really full of learning. Or it's making time to understand what the meaning is behind the work, right? Meaningful work has been a huge focus for people, especially looking for jobs in today's world. You know, how can we teach and develop people? You know, AI is on the rise. People want to learn about AI. 40% of people are using AI with their jobs already. So how can we learn new ways to leverage this technology together, make it more collaborative? Those are just some examples of how I've, helped organizations to sort of think through how are you restructuring this time together. And I'm excited to hear, other examples. I'm learning new ones every day, to your point.
Totally. And the thing is, I actually see a big link between what Neil shared and Danielle shared. So let me join some dots for you. I've been in tech for almost 24 years. Some of my very good colleagues and friends, Neil, maybe you'd be headhunting them, are very senior developers and architects in tech companies. And it's very interesting, Danielle, because a lot of them are looking at packages which aren't about money. They're actually about mentorship and support, regardless of the model in the organization. And so there's an interesting join between those things as well. Yes, they're developers that do want to perhaps do their work, but they're also looking for support in other ways, for, as you say, friendship, mentorship. So I actually see your observation, Danielle, from that more recent experience. I see it as really important, but I still see it for the more established tech community that's still in need as well. So it's beautiful to join those two things together and think about those as considerations in this whole conversation, what's been shared. Gonzalo, what would you add to the conversation?
Well, guys, I was just thinking about this 2.5 hour meeting, and I don't remember the last time I was 2.5 hours in front of a computer. It just trained me without being there. I want to add some short and sweet notes. The first one is with all the information we put out there, with all the experience we have from incredible companies doing this for a long time, like GitLab, Doist, and so many others, still the lack of education or information, whatever you want to call it, is actually one of the main roadblocks. People don't understand that this is a whole new way of working. And while we hired agile consultants, agile coaches, scrum masters, and everything in between, but still, most companies are not hiring a good consultant to drive them from one step to the second step of the remote work implementation, which is really scary, in my opinion, as I see these companies going remote do all the same mistakes in terms of how they communicate, too many meetings, 2.5 hour meetings, which is completely insane. The mistakes are always the same because they didn't hire a person to guide them through the transition. And there are right now many good people doing it, which I think is a great opportunity for all the companies, for all kinds of budgets. But please have someone guiding you internally, externally, your choice. But this will be the key for the success. The second one, and I mentioned, is lack of documentation. Again, 99.99% of the companies I consult don't have or have very poor and outdated documentation. Like, just do it, please. Start simple, start with the meeting today. Start with the notes from this webinar, but document everything. Start very simple. Use ChatGPT if you have to, please. Just do it. Second, we have also people are stuck in this time management era where is someone working at 5, yes or no? Like, we don't care. I actually like to go to the gym during the day so I can work later. Maybe like a lot of developers are very productive during the night. Should we forbid them to work when they are productive so they work at 9 a.m. when they are sleeping and trying to survive? No, we should let them work when they are the best at their work, because we are paying them for the output, not for the time to be online. And then nobody talks about this, but so many companies, the biggest roadblock is how many millions they invested in real estate. I think it's like the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to speak about it. Facebook invested billions in real estate. The commercial real estate is just empty. We see now finally news on New York on how the commercial real estate is just empty, laying there. What should we do with this? Are we waiting for people going back to the office? People don't want to go back to the office. So if you are stuck in a lease, and many companies are, maybe sublet office spaces, maybe create a great co-working space where invite people from all over the world to connect with people that are still going to the office. I think many companies should develop co-working spaces or something completely different, maybe event spaces, but don't let the lease and the money you got stuck, the bad investments of the past, just forbid you of a great future. I think that's a very bad move. And then we need to speak about the water cooler. What the hell happened in the water? I just worked in 3 companies in the office, but what was happening there? Because I never had a breakthrough in my company in the water cooler, but still these old companies think, oh, the water cooler. What is happening there? Is it true? I think it's a myth. maybe the coffee machine I would understand, but not the water cooler. We should stop this insanity. If your company was relying on the water cooler to innovate, alert, something is wrong. Please use tools. Go to Mural. Mural is a great tool to bring innovation, to brainstorm asynchronously. Hire someone to make a brainstorm on innovation inside your company, but please don't rely on the water cooler. That's a lie.
That's so true, Gonzalo. And I have been by a water cooler, 24 years in tech. I've seen it happen. And I'm going to bring in my take on that, Gonzalo. The
Please.
men generally that put the water coolers in, who were mainly running these places, these offices 23, 24 years ago, it was their way of monitoring, of presenteeism, of checking, because their water cooler was their way of sort of saying, oh, that's where people are having a bit of social time. Right? So it's so antiquated. So I think that the media has grabbed onto that. What we have to realize that it's actually about control, because if we bring back the key proponents of remote first, it's trust and transparency. We've mentioned it lots. Going away from having to watch you, trusting that you will deliver that outcome, that you will give the results in terms of performance. We don't need to see you chatting by the water cooler to know that, if we're leading and we're building an organization that way. So there's been some questions coming through, and I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So we've had a fantastic, lots and lots of food for thought there. One of the things I also wanted to comment on, and it relates to some of the points that you've actually made, all of you, is this piece about, there are lots of amazing guides and consultants out there now. Some of us are here on this call that can help guide organizations. But one thing I think that the pandemic hasn't done us a favor on, everyone, is that the transition has been so reactive to remote work. So again, if you've got a project management, a business analysis, an agile background, you're going to know that when you design a new organizational design, that is part of change management, and particularly for any company over 5 or 6 in size. So we're not the very, very small ones. We're talking about small to medium enterprises to bigger. You need to realize it's a change management process often, right? That is also needed. Daniela and Gonzalo said it, even Neil, in terms of designing that recruitment, you probably do need someone responsible. You do need to make an investment. You do need to create a program. So I want to cut out the BS there, that it's not something that someone can do part-time 1 hour a week. You cannot transition a whole company with that amount of effort. You can't transition a company, as Gonzalo said, by simply reading the information. You have to actually have the time to build it, have the time to learn, whatever the model may be. So I think that's also maybe a word for everyone. So let's go over for the questions that we have. So there is a question here that I think is really interesting. We'll come to it in one moment. It's about belonging. It was on our list. So how to foster and create belonging in the remote first workplace. I'll go to the panel in a moment on that. But I thought there was another interesting one before we go there on collaboration. Don't you think that eventually at a certain size, it is necessary to collaborate, not only work on your tasks? And I think that's a little bit about what we were saying about the potential silos that we may find if we don't create that environment, that ideal asynchronous environment, so not live, not sync environment, which again, the word documentation is the foundation of that underneath it all, including the channels like Slack, etc., and the different tools like Miro and Mural, etc. you may use. But what do you think on collaboration? So let's see, who wants to answer that on collaboration? Anyone want to nod at me and go for it? When do we necessarily need to collaborate as a remote first team or organization? Anyone?
I could take a stab at it. Just so I've spoken to, recently, so this company that has been, there's one person internally who is really this advocate for, okay, we're doing this remote first thing. And the sort of course of action that he saw best fit his organization was doing this sort of every 6 weeks, certain teams would come together for like 2 to 3 days, and they would put everyone up in a hotel, and they would have these sort of like, time together. And then every 3 months, for the people who were actually full remote, it would be, you know, a quarterly event where everyone would come, and not just the smaller team. So that's like one example that I've seen. I think the last time I spoke to him, it was going well. People were happy and more responsive to it because it didn't require them. Again, a lot of people moved away. There became, you know, cities became donuts. People dispersed, went outside the cities. They enrolled their kids in new schools and lives and extracurriculars, and they took up gardening, and they don't want to come back to an office, and resume that sort of life. I think this is especially true for Gen Xers who and older millennials who are really entrenched in having kids, and having, you know, that full life, and full plate. And so I think, you know, just a consideration around, you know, what might work for people who, you know, in terms of having little flexibility, in terms of, you know, how often do you really need to come together? And I've seen that work well for some organizations. But yeah, just to offer sort of like a model, because I think it's helpful to hear a little bit more about, you know, tangible examples.
Totally, Danielle. And one comment I'll make is a lot of people don't actually understand what collaboration is compared to communication. So I would go back to that person asking that question and really, if I was doing a workshop with them, try and understand what collaboration means to them, both on an individual, team and organizational level, because there's often confusion with that word. It's been misused in the media coverage as well about remote work and innovation. Totally. So I'm conscious of the time. There is another question that came in for Neil, and I want to make sure that we finish on time. So we've got 6 minutes left. So get any of your final questions in. We're going to cover off belonging. I will go to Gonzalo first on that, but Neil, the question for you, I believe, is how is recruitment for remote work worldwide done? So I think that's a good one in terms for you to explain about time zones and recruitment and all of that. So that specific one on recruitment's come in for you.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to take that. So I think there's essentially 2 ways that you can recruit for people worldwide, 2 categories, let's say. One is DIY, do it yourself. You go out and hire your own recruitment team. You go out and recruit for them yourselves. You hire local lawyers to make sure that you're compliant locally, because employment law is governed by where they work, not where your company is based. So you need to make sure that you're compliant with the local law. That'll help make sure that everything goes smoothly for your company and you don't have problems later. And you also need to understand the culture, etc. So that's one way, do it yourself. The other way is partnering with a company that helps with that. That's what we do. We help companies hire developers in Latin America. So essentially you work with us and we help you find those developers, get them into your organization, get them attracted to your company, and help you retain them as well. So those are the 2 models. And I'll go into a little bit of the, you know, advantages, disadvantages of them. I've done both of them before. Previously, I did it myself. I went out and found developers. I had a team of about 30 developers in Moldova, Eastern Europe, and I had 30 developers in Brazil, and then some other people scattered about. I did it myself. I'd have to say it worked out well for me in the end, but it took a long time to get it right. Having to understand those different cultures, build trust locally. There's just little things that you aren't going to understand. I didn't understand for the longest time. This is kind of embarrassing that in Eastern Europe, a lot of times they put their last name first on LinkedIn and other places, and I'd be addressing people by their last name instead of their first name. Thankfully, I learned that along the way. And you have to understand that in certain cultures, especially with remote work, there's lower trust. People don't understand your company. They don't know if you're going to, be good for payment, etc. So you really have to understand how to build trust with people locally to attract them and retain them. You have to find local lawyers, etc., to get things off the ground. So it does take a long time to get right. And that's why a lot of companies partner with somebody like us, where we take care of all that. Companies come to us, they say, hey, I want to find a software developer or a designer. And we take care of everything from finding that person, getting them equipment locally, making sure they get paid, and helping you retain them. So those are the kinds of things that a company like ours helps with to do it. So those are the two different models to hire. I'm gonna also hit on one other thing.
No, sorry, gonna interrupt you. We've got 3 minutes late. I want to go around the room.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, not sorry. That's my job as the moderator. I want to make sure that we get a chance to get feedback on belonging from each of the panelists. So on belonging, I know it's a massive question, right? But you've met someone in the lift. Okay, imagine this, picture this in a hotel, and they're saying, oh, you're that person that knows a bit about remote work. But surely people don't feel, involved, attached, they don't feel belonging in a remote first environment. What would you say to them if you had 10, 15 seconds max? So think of 2 or 3 words, think of some practical things. How do remote first teams foster belonging? Going to you, Gonzalo, then Danielle, then to you, Neil.
Remote companies have to build communities, and communities are the people, and the employees are part of the community, and the community should work as a sports team, having their rituals, their symbols, their gear like t-shirts, cups, and celebrate wins and go to stress together like a sports team. So that's how we define the team belonging. And actually all the companies I know, the remote ones, the good ones, have a stronger culture than I ever saw in in-house companies.
Beautiful, Gonzalo. Danielle.
One thing I'll say is that finding a good employer and building trust is a lot like dating. People could do it from all over the world, and regardless of where you might come from or who you are, people are able to find and make it work. And so I'd say being able to adapt and learn and adapt to people's needs, and build for neurodiversity, among other types of diversity, is a really crucial skill. Using personal like tests and things to help inform you of your strategy of how you actually create feedback and set boundaries and all of expectations and all of that.
Fantastic, Danielle. Neil, what could you add to that? You're on mute.
What I would say is what I've seen from the companies that do remote first best is they really get people involved in the results of their work, right? They show the direct impact that their work does. They make it easy and convenient to work on their own schedule, and as a result they end up retaining people for a long period of time, longer than in-person companies do.
Fantastic. What a lovely way to end. Interesting. All 3 of your points lent into leadership skills, because nothing the 3 of you said any manager can do without, or any leader can do without training. Thank you so much on behalf of SafetyWing. Thank you, Neil, Danielle, and Gonzalo. And for those watching the playback, thanks for joining in. If you need a demo, you can scan the QR code here now. I look forward to seeing you again next month in August for the next SafetyWing webinar. And thanks again to the panel. Have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you may be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.